FEPS DataTalks. This morning, we'll be talking about business to government data sharing, or to put it differently, data sharing in the public interest. And this is a series of events that we host together with Mia-Petra Kumpula-Natri, member of the European Parliament. Now don't worry, you don't have to listen to me for the next hour. We have excellent speakers this morning. First, we have with us Francesca Bria. I don't think she really needs an introduction, but just to give you a quick background, she's the president of the Italian National Innovation Fund. And of course, before, she was the CTO, that's the Chief Technology Officer for the municipality of Barcelona. And there she experienced, of course, some of the challenges when it comes to accessing data sets for public authorities. And she will be sharing some of her views and some of her experiences that we can learn from when we look at the Data Act itself and what can be done. And the second speaker is Paul Keller. He's Policy Director at the Open Future Foundation. And he and his colleagues just published a report on a public data commons, which looks at the Data Act and what could and should be done to develop a veritable public interest framework for data sharing. So on the one hand, we have the problems, on the other hand, we have the solutions. And after that, there will also be room for your input, dear participants. For that, I want to make two quick remarks. If you have any questions or remarks, you can always post them in the chat, in the Zoom chat. It will be monitored by my colleague off screen, Levi. There's also a room for you, if you like, to join the floor like physically. So to actually take the floor, that means that you have to put on your camera, you have to unmute your mic, but it also means you will be shown on the live stream. So only do that if you're comfortable being shown on the live stream. This we'll get to in the second half of the webinar. Before we kick off with Francesca, let me thank Mia-Petra Kumpula-Natri for being here and for also co-hosting this series of events. Good morning, Mia-Petra. And given that you're, of course, also very interested personally in this file and professionally because you are the shadow rapporteur in the European Parliament for the Data Act, so the recent proposal from the European Commission to foster data sharing, I think it would be good if you could quickly sketch perhaps the political context. Why is this important? Why are we doing this?
Thank you, and I'm very happy to start this working with you all here online, and then later for the file as a shadow rapporteur. The Parliament is still in the middle of the negotiation, which committees have what power. But I'm working in ITRE, and it's presented from the legal side that it should be our file, which I very much agree, of course, as also ITRE did the data strategy on behalf of the Parliament after the Commission presented its strategy, the data strategy for this term of the legislation. And I did that on behalf of the Parliament as a rapporteur. So then on that, we have this Data Act as a missing piece of the puzzle. We have already the platform regulation ready. We have the Data Governance Act. Actually, if you look this nice abbreviation B2B, G2B, or B2G. Platforms was kind of B2B, and it's also in the Data Act to take more on that. But then what the public can do good for the business, it's a Data Governance Act. There are ways also that the public data can be used. And this Data Act for me is in big part, as stated for this morning, business to governance. So what is the public interest and data is gathered so much also by the private actors. Of course, the examples are like pandemic. We want to solve, we want to save lives. And then some data is in the silos of the companies or of the public sectors also doesn't flow freely for the analysis that how can we tackle the pandemic. So that's a very concrete example. But also I think that even the draft says now, and it's a very delicate point for this data sharing to the public, is that it needs to be exceptional circumstances, kind of emergency, pandemia, or security questions. And if there's no time to legislate, then public sector can ask data from the private side. But I also think there are a lot of other public policy issues that needs to be taken on board. We know that this is very delicate, and that's also why Commission gave the proposal being the exceptional cases. Of course, there will be also sectoral legislation, but I hope this as a horizontal piece of the European level legislation would facilitate, make it easier also for the different sectoral legislation when needed, but not everything can be laid on the sectoral side too. So I think here we go. We want data to help us, and data is also a source of the economical activities. There has a part, but then looking the societal needs that the data can help. And this is really us, not to drift, to sail, to set some rules for the data movements and how make it available on the way that is secure for the citizens, GDPR, but this also could look at the rights of the smaller companies with their data, so that not always the hierarchy goes that the bigger one doesn't want to give the data for the smaller player, but then always I find that the even bigger, they want to get their rights, that this is actually my data that comes from above, but I don't have rights. But that's maybe more for our next breakfast session. So this one with the public interest and B2G abbreviation is a very nice topic. I'm very happy that this morning is taking place now with the good speakers.
Thanks a lot, Mia Petra, and I can only agree. So we have the political context. So let's move straight to Francesca. Francesca,
yeah.
Why is it important that we have new data laws to govern and to open up business to government data transfers? And what were some of the problems, for instance, that you experienced at Barcelona to access important data sets, for instance, for new public services? What's your take on this?
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks to FEPS for inviting me in this conversation. Thank you also for Mia Petra to sketch out the political context and to make this this morning possible, because it is, I think, a topic of great importance at a political level. And I think we should be very pragmatic about how to face this question and try to advance some proposals and some experiments related to the importance for data sharing in creating public value. I think I want to make two points before I go in the details. The first point is that for me, data is not a technical subject. So we are used to have these conversations about the importance of open data, the importance of interoperability, of data portability, of standards, of ethics, security, and sovereignty by design only in the technical community, as if we are talking about a technology or something technical. I think it is important to understand that those kind of conversations about data infrastructures are really underpinning some of the main policy decisions of our time. And Mia Petra, of course, was talking about the pandemics, how it was important, and it is important today, to have access to data in order to understand what's happening, in order to tackle the pandemic, in order to save lives. But I think more and more, and also because of the pandemic, which imposed the social distancing, imposed some kind of lockdowns, and people switched their life online very rapidly, we understood how digital infrastructures in general and data are underpinning the essential services of our society. Distance education, smart working, food delivery online, digital healthcare. And by the way, sorry to make this premise, of course, it is everybody that's probably listening us knows this kind of thing, but I think it's good to mention again that the EU is investing around 400 billion in general in the Next Generation EU and other programs to digitalize all services. Yes, so to make us do this leap in the digital society. And this has a huge implication in our lives, and it has a huge implication when we're talking about, as I said before, the kind of management, the fight against climate change and mobility, the education, the healthcare. How do we exactly reshape and redefine our institutions in the digital age. So I think that it is very important to regulate. So I'm one of the people that think that this kind of framework that the European Commission is putting forward is a digital constitution for our society now. The digital the Digital Service Act, the Digital Market Act, the Data Act, the Artificial Intelligence Act, the Data Governance Act, and the GDPR, of course, is a very important kind of digital constitution for the people. And I think it's not hindering innovation, because most of the time we hear, well, right, you're regulating, but you're blocking innovation, you're hindering innovation. No, I think we need the right regulation and the right approach in order to basically open up a next generation innovation model that's privacy preserving, rights protecting, that puts forward our collective fundamental rights in society and protects our civil liberties. Now, sorry for the premise. I think when it comes to this private to government or private to society, business to society data sharing topic, I think there is not enough element in the regulation as it is now. And also to what Mia Petra said, I know you're doing another probably breakfast related to the business side of this, which is important. But I just want to say that everything we're going to talk about now, which is basically right to data or data for the public interest, should not be seen as in contradiction with protecting IP or protecting, small companies to innovate in the digital ecosystem. I think they should be seen as we can do both. We can enable innovation, which means we have to open up the data market, because we know that it is very oligopolistic at the moment, and that the over-the-top players have so much more data and they can dictate the rules to access this data. So small companies and innovators actually can partner with the public sector in order to innovate services that are built with that data. And we have to make sure that we protect their competitive advantage. So we don't do something that, can hurt their competitive advantage, while we preserve the capacity to create public value with data. And public value with data, get into kind of more details. When I was in Barcelona, of course, at the city level, I think why a city is a very important laboratory for data-driven policymaking is that data infrastructure at the city level is very tangible. It's something very concrete. So it's not something abstract in the cloud that you need to explain why do you even need access to data. It's because, with data, you basically can do all the main policies that you need to do, from access, from affordable housing to sustainable mobility, to the net zero environmental policy action, the measurement of CO2 emissions and all the kind of pollution in the neighborhood. The mobility topic is absolutely central now in cities, and that's why you need also private data in order to be able to regulate in a smart way. So I think a lot of the time, in particular with a platform economy, you need to have capacity to understand what's happening in order to do better regulation. So this is, I think, one of the central part. Why do you need data? Two things. For one side, we have to look at the value sharing, at the data value sharing side. So we said, there is a huge economic advantage when it comes to data. It's the raw material of the digital economy. So also for the public sector, and of course for small companies and the local economy, it is very important to be able to make decisions about the economic development. And this needs also access to data. So there is a question of redistributing the value. around data, which is an economic question, and I think it has to be put in the agenda. And the other side is, how do we take better decisions? How do we make policy better, which is evidence-based? So we need data to do that. We need data to assess if our policy work. For example, all the net zero policies, some cities are closing off, for example, entire city centers from cars. They are rethinking planning. They are rethinking mobility. I need to know if this works or not, and I need to measure a lot of indicators in order to improve what I'm doing. And to do this, I need access to data. And also I need access to data to regulate in, let's say, smart regulation. Smart regulation implies that, for example, if I'm regulating affordable housing and I'm dealing with Airbnb, I cannot be dealing with a black box. Mia Petra talked about it. There is another regulation for that, which is the platform economy regulation. But these things are interrelated. We have to understand the implication of that. So if I'm dealing with Airbnb, I need to know what goes in and out, because their algorithms have an impact on the house pricing. Yes, so otherwise I cannot do my regulation. I cannot improve access to housing. At the same time, their algorithms also impact the the collective bargaining. So actually unions are now starting to look into this topic of accessing data and transparency and so on, because the algorithms is the boss, is making the rules and have an impact on the workers' rights, very clearly so. So there are many implications. I want to go straight into the technical part here. When I was
Francesca,
in Barcelona, do I have 1 more minute?
Yeah, I'll give you 1 more minute. And if you need to round up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, excellent.
So when I was in Barcelona, I implemented clauses in public procurement contracts to get the data back, the data that we needed in order to, do all these kind of policies in the city context. And so we introduced clauses, we call them data sovereignty clauses in public procurement contracts. That were together with other clauses, interoperability, portability, ethics, security, and sovereignty by design, and privacy enhancing technologies by design, and all of that. And the data sovereignty clauses basically said that any public procurement contract that you do in the city in that context, the provider, whoever wins the bid, has to give back the data in machine readable format to the city, and this data becomes in the public good, in the public domain, of course, with privacy protection. So you are anonymizing the data, you're protecting the data, but this data belongs to the citizens that are paying taxes. And here we're not talking only about technology services. I mean, we implemented in the telephone contract first, but now we implemented in everything: electric bicycles, lighting, water, smart water systems, every services. And this enabled us, and then you can also open up this data, and you can use this data with challenges, with prices, but also with services for the innovative ecosystem to build services on top of this data. So this, of course, you can take better decisions, you can do your policies, but also it creates more economic value. And now I'm working with the city of Hamburg and in a broader UN context to look at specifically private business to government data sharing for the public interest. And we are basically doing experiments that will develop a way, a win-win with the public sector and the private sector to share mobility data for better regulation. And I think here I go because I know that Paul will talk after me. I read their proposal. I mean, there is a discussion after. But for me, it's very good, like the why, but the how and the what, I'm not very convinced, because I don't think we have to start, creating a centralized bureaucratic body that will decide what's for the public interest and what's not for the public interest. How do we do that? I think it's a matter of trying to do it. So I'm here to say, we are setting up experiments and projects, because you need to regulate when you know how this needs to be done, and not just, okay, first we regulate and then we see if it works, because otherwise we go in a situation where we have a perfect regulation, but how to enforce it, how to make it real, we don't know how to do that. And I think we shouldn't go in this kind of way. We should basically enable this form of experimentation, maybe some boxes for now, but then regulate and make laws only when we know what exactly is needed.
Okay, thank you very much, Francesca. I already feel that here's a first difference of opinion that will open up. I think you mentioned a lot. So there's a lot of use cases that you mentioned. You mentioned public procurement, which always comes back in these discussions. And you already mentioned that you don't believe in some kind of centralized institution to regulate this at a European level, as I understood it, when we talk about B2G data sharing. But let's hear from Paul, because I think he has perhaps a slightly different view on this. Paul, how would you respond to that?
So, hello. Thank you this morning for the invitation. And it would be nice to jump just into this question about centralized institution or not, but maybe a little bit of background for people who maybe, unlike Francesca, needs closer, unlike Francesca, haven't read our proposal. So I agree with a lot of you, what you said at the beginning, Francesca, and also what Mia Petra said at the beginning. This is an opportunity, right? Like, and it's a missing piece of the puzzle. There is this set of what Francesca called sort of digital constitution emerging, and that is not something which is taking place all the time, and we will have many more options in the future to get this right. There is probably a moment now to get this right and to be ambitious about this, right? Like, and we've seen some ambitious regulatory proposals being passed in the last couple of months, the last year, and the Data Act really feels like the missing puzzle piece here to some degree. And as it was mentioned before, like it's a broader piece of regulation which brings a number of things together. There will be other data talks here to address other topics, but like this, for us, really, this chapter 5 in the middle, which deals with business to government data sharing, or I like how Francesca phrased that, which should probably be private to society data sharing, is probably the most interesting one. The other ones are not uninteresting, but this is the place where we really think the Commission's proposal also falls short of what should have been on the table. For the other ones, it's merely for a large deal technical discussions about tweaking things a little bit here. But I think in chapter 5, we have an opportunity to really see if this is the right way forward that the Commission proposed there. And this doesn't come out of thin air. This comes out of a discussion about this business to government data sharing. Some people in the past have called that reverse PSI, so reverse public sector information, so where society gives to the public. This has been a discussion for at least the last 10 years. There have been high-level expert groups in this country. There's been quite some substantial research and preparatory research that went into the Data Act proposal. There have been studies being commissioned. There's been an impact assessment. And a lot of this works honestly pointed to something more ambitious, to more structural solutions or more structural mechanisms for business to government data sharing. What the Commission has delivered now is essentially something that is ad hoc, that is in response to emergencies, that is in response to exceptional situations, but that doesn't see a flow from private data owners towards society, towards government as a structural thing that helps us achieve societal goals, and also things like better policy making, as Francesca pointed out, very importantly, right? Like it sees it as sort of as the exception, as the last thing, if you don't have the time to pass legislation, and by the way, everything needs to be deleted afterwards. So like if you want to review, if you made good policy choices, like good luck, because the data is gone, right? So, and to some degree, obviously, like the examples with the pandemic, and there will be exceptional situations, right? Like, and we need this mechanism, but we need a pillar next to that. And that is essentially what our proposal says. Also build a pillar next to that that operates on the logic of public interest, which is something that will be hard to define, especially for a horizontal thing, right? Like we know there is sectoral regulation in the making, most importantly, the European Health Data Space Regulation, which is a fairly targeted measure where it's easier to define what's the public interest and then easier to make these rules. But we should not give away or give up on this notion of the public interest in the underlying horizontal framework. And what we propose is, like, if there is public interest and we need some entity, or to your point about decentralizing set of entities or decentralized process to figure out what's relevant here, then this data should be shared in a more structural way. It should be brought into what we call a public data commons, and it should be kept there and should be made available and should be aggregated with other data, of course, privacy preserving. And it's not necessary that this ends up as open data, that a lot of government data ends up, because there is sensible stuff in there. And we maybe do not want all actors in society to have the same amount of access to this. But we need some way of keep bringing this out of the ad hoc thing. Here's an Excel sheet, here's a data set, to something where we build a database, a knowledge base of public interest information that can be used by researchers, by policymakers across the field, and that will give policymakers, but also small and medium enterprises around Europe, like a competitive advantage in developing like better policies and better products in the field. And so what we've proposed is an outline on very rough things. The next challenge will be working with policymakers on seeing how we could translate this into concrete proposals for changes to the Commission's proposal. We have ideas about this type of feedback where this is read as like we are proposing some central entity that says what's in the public interest or not, is very valuable feedback. And we'll look at this, and I'm certainly not interested in creating some sort of like Ministry of Public Interest that sort of becomes a gatekeeper of this type of information. So we need to work on this, but at the moment, I think we're also in the phase where we need to change the perception really from this is a good regulation, there's some technical discussion required, and then let's try to wrap this up within a year, towards something, hey, wait a minute, there is some missed opportunities in here, and we need to get this right to some degree on a general level, and then probably we need to get this right more specifically in sectoral regulation on top of it. So we also need to think about the relationship between sectoral regulation in this piece and the horizontal regulation, which I think is also like a little bit missing, both from the Data Act and when you look at the health data space regulation. So there's a lot of work ahead. I'm very happy that you guys have taken an interest in this and that you've sort of seemed to share the ideas about the same direction that we're going. And I'm also looking forward to the discussion and questions, and thank you for this.
Oh, can you hear me? Because I cannot really hear you, and I cannot see myself. Okay, can you write in the chat if you can hear me? Because I stopped hearing you at all.
Jan, can you hear us?
Yes, yes.
Okay, excellent. Great. Okay, perfect. All right, please, Jan. What's your take on this?
Right, thank you. By the way, I have the camera on. If you could also put it on, but it's fine as well.
We can't see you right now on the camera.
Okay. So I think we first need to recognize that there is this the need to balance data governance in this kind of like trilemma, right? We have the fundamental rights, privacy being the key one that we see all the time and talk about all the time, and this is the one that has been recognized. But also there's other values that are important. The public interest as a kind of the most clear term we have for some kind of societal collective assessment of costs and benefits, like developing public services, improving decision-making, or empowering citizens. And then there is also the economic value, so the one that we mostly refer to when we think about B2B sharing and I don't know, GDP growth and all that, which refers to the generative activity of companies. And it's not like this, for example, the notion of privacy is the supreme. In various cases, European bodies chose to satisfy other values and rights. So the public interest, which is maybe not that clear, but it's mentioned in the GDPR, and it is growing in importance, especially after the pandemic. So we see that we have this conflict of values. It is inherent because it stems from, kind of dynamic quality of life, and neither extracting data for profit by big tech is fruitful. A privacy straitjacket is not fruitful as well, or some kind of state panopticon. So if we have this conflict of values in democracy, it cannot be done away, but we can internalize it. So by creating an institution that internalizes this democratic conflict resolution over the access to data and use of data, once we do this, we actually create this data commons, right? This is the institution. So the key question for me is, how do we build the institution so that it has the necessary scale to restructure the data value cycle, right? So it's not some kind of small sandbox experiment, so that it has the scale, so that it empowers communities to govern their data and protects them from abuse and misuse. And I think without a powerful institution, it's kind of like playing Hamlet without the prince, right? The power asymmetry always tends towards the existing big data silos and key players that consume, use, or produce data. So
All
I
right,
think
Jan, thanks a lot. I think you already shared a lot.
Mhm.
So I'm going to transfer that back to Francesca and Paul. And I think this is particularly relevant also for Francesca, because I got the impression that from the stories that you shared is that you think a lot can be done at municipal level already in Hamburg, in Barcelona. On the other hand, I mean, I also worked a lot in EU policy, and I think a big weakness of a lot of EU proposals is always that they forget the institutional side. So they come up with a bunch of rules without the institutions that are necessary to kind of foster this new reality. For instance, on data sharing, or what Jan just mentioned, to kind of make trade-offs between different public values like privacy and the public interest. So how do you look at this discussion, and also perhaps a reaction to Paul?
Yes, so I don't disagree with the kind of, let's say, ideal objectives. I think what I don't really understand is why we don't just act with the tools we have at our disposal today. So I don't want to say that this has to happen at municipal level. I think that for me, a lot of the times when I see governments at national level trying to implement this digital policy top down without considering the complexity of getting to people on the ground. I mean, this is why I really wanted to make the premise at the very beginning. This is not technical. We are basically, digital services are going to be the essential gateways that people will need to use in order to access and to, the essential services of our society. It's going to transform the way they access, government services and the way they live. So I think it's a bit naive to think of like just implementing regulation top down from Brussels, and this is gonna work for all of Europe. I mean, we already saw this is not happening. That's why, this is not because I don't see that at the end, we may want to have an approach which is really a European data trust that is built with decentralized privacy enhancing and right protecting technology, which is, working in the public interest, but also enabling our SMEs and startups and companies to be more competitive. And then we link it to Gaia X on one side with the standards and interoperable, security standards, and with the European data spaces with vertical regulations ad hoc. This is also my vision. The point is, how do we get there? And I think if you look at digital ID, if you look at, the other pieces of regulation and so on, regulation alone, first of all, it's not enough. I mean, this regulation has to be built, has to be good, but also then you will need the legal I mean, the regulatory at a kind of more specific level, the technical, so you will need a technological infrastructure. So you need to embed those rules into the technological infrastructure. And then you need an economic model with a social impact analysis. So it's a bit broader than that. So I'm just discouraging this, we regulate it and it's going to work approach. And I'm trying to say, okay, so if we want to have to see what works, because I really, like at the beginning, Mia Petra said, I don't want this to be in contrast with, for example, economic competitiveness at a local level. We are preserving the public interest, and this is a specific, let's say, public digital infrastructures are going to be in place to do that. And some rules will be there because of the public value and the public interest. But at the same time, they are not going to be in contradiction with, you know, creating more capacity for our companies to build data-driven services, you know, that can grow and scale, for example. So you want to regulate in a way that this doesn't, you know, create more burden, for example, for the small companies. And then again, the only one that are going to be able to deal with it, with the public sector, is going to be the big tech. This is, for example, a possibility if you don't do it right. Yes, that the only companies that are going to be able to comply are the big companies. And then again, we are in the situation where the public sector can only work with the big tech because they are the ones that are going to execute this very complicated regulation the best. So how not to do that? And that's why my approach is a bit more, okay, why don't we start implementing these procurement laws? Because the procurement laws, for example, they don't solve everything. I agree with you. And that's why now with Hamburg, we're looking also, what about, for example, e-scooters and mobility sharing vehicles that we do not contract as a city, but they just happen to work in the public space. Since we need to regulate the public space for obvious reasons, how do we make sure that this data maybe can be kept as a trust with rules, with one framework, and then, you know, they can do their business, but we can, as public sector, regulate and use the data and put up maybe the data for third parties. Because that was the thing, sorry, Justin, I'm taking some time, but that's the thing. I think it has to be private, to government, but to society, because maybe I want to have a standardized API with standardized rules for third parties to access this data. Maybe it's an NGO, maybe it's a trade union, maybe it's a citizen group, maybe it's another company. Yes, so it's more private to society for me. But the point is, so there are procurement rules that can be implemented, and the sandboxes, Jan, they can be, for the moment, they can actually then be scaled. Because if you will go now to all public institutions and say, let's do this now, they will come up with a lot of regulatory problems. Their laws locally, and so you need to see, okay, what happens if we do this and this and that? I think we are still at the stage that we want to experiment scenarios. And I think regulators like Mia Petra need to see concrete use cases that enable us to push this idea forward. So to summarize, I agree with the tension. A public European data trust may be a form of institution. For me, it's going to have to be decentralized and based on concrete problems on the ground. But to get there, that's, I think, the question.
All right, thanks a lot, Francesca. I will grant Paul a reaction because I feel he's dying to do so.
Unnecessary dying. I sort of agree with almost everything you say, except maybe like I want to make the case for the importance of also engaging in a very structured, and you call that top down, and yes, it is top down, but like there is a proposal on the table, and this proposal frames the ideas of that data needs to flow from private entities to society, to the government in very restrictive ways, right? Like it says basically, this is not what's supposed to happen normally. This is what's to happen in emergencies, in response to emergencies, in recovery from emergencies, and in exceptional situations where really like you've tried 5 other things. And that is a framing of this thing that will, if this Commission proposal would go through in this way, that will preclude a lot of the things that you are arguing for. And I totally agree. This is also, it has a bit of the feeling of being too early on the table, that sort of goes against the point about missing piece of the puzzle and maybe the time is now. But it has this idea that it's sort of trying to build like the Data Act, very sort of elaborate landscape of data sharing and access to data that maybe we don't fully understand that. And there is a danger in trying to making rules while we do not have a full understanding what needs to be done. But the fact is, this proposal is on the table, and it has, in this specific part, there's a real danger of precluding all kind of these interesting opportunities, precluding a decentralized approach to this if we don't widen this. And I fully take your point about we need to be mindful that this does not, like in widening this, we close off other avenues or chart a very specific way that may point out unworkable. But at least this changing the way this issue is approached in the proposal, I think we share a common necessity, a common urgency to get that happen.
Yes.
Right, thanks a lot, Paul. Levi, is it correct that somebody would like to take the floor?
Okay, so there's a question. So could we use the European Bauhaus as a universal space to experiment with consented EU citizen data and NGI innovators, the SMEs, collaborating using the public EU research infrastructure?
Francesca,
did you get that question? Because I understood
yeah,
you also have been involved in Neubauhaus.
I think I wanted to first reply to Paul that yes, I totally agree with that. What he said is a very important statement. So then, maybe the feedback to the regulator would be keep it open. I mean, it's too restrictive. It doesn't allow for the experimentation, not only that we need, that is happening. This experimentation is already happening. Because this is obviously sometimes, it's much less in conflict with what the EC believed to be, that you experiment for the public interest and for the public good and for the public value, while at the same time also being, more allied with the needs, for example, of innovators and small companies and, local development activities. So these experiments are happening and there needs to be space for it. So my approach at the moment is I wouldn't see it regulated tightly. I see openings. I would like to see openings as exactly what Paul said at his last intervention, for this to happen without, too much restriction. And then along the line, we may also want to maybe, define it more at a regulatory level. And I don't even know if this needs to happen at the EC level at the moment. Honestly, I don't know, because in some cases, maybe the EC, but in other cases, maybe even cities can have their own laws on how this will happen, which will then, push the EC to take a different regulatory approach. This may also happen. I mean, this possibly can happen. So I'm totally on board with that. And I think this should happen, because otherwise it's very worrying. Of course, if the Data Act is set in a way that we can't do what we are doing, I mean, then it's like the most innovative part of what can happen with data is blocked. And this is a serious problem.
Well, thank you, Francesca. I feel, to be honest, that there's not so much disagreement. So it's a difference of perspectives. But in the meantime, let's go to Maurizio. Are you ready to take the floor, Maurizio? Please unmute your mic.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I just present myself. I am representing the users of statistics. I am the chair of this ESAC, the European Statistical Advisory Committee. And the point is that this Data Act, the proposal that we have now, is not sufficient now for the statistical purposes. And I understand that we are speaking about creating public value and redistributing this value to the citizens. And of course, data that belong to the citizens should be distributed at least in an official, from an official channel like it is the official statistics. So I understand the philosophy of the law that is regarding emergency, but we have also exceptional situation that we should take into consideration. And I believe that the possibility to answer quickly to the citizens by official channels, like it is the official statistics, and also by means of the official statistics to open also to the use in the scientific research under the control of the official statistics. This, I think, would be something that is really, really needed. My question is, what is the idea regarding the statistics and how to preserve this possibility to create a public good with statistics using the Data Act, because really now it is something needed, really needed for official statistics to have privately held data to increase in a quick way the answers to the users of statistics, to the citizens.
Thank you, De Mauricio. So you ask about to what extent statistical information should be covered by the Data Act, because there's a lot of valuable data that's right now not being able to be handled by statistical authorities because they simply don't have the authority to gather and use that data, if I understood it correctly. Perhaps Paul, you want to first respond to that?
Yeah, I can try a response. It's obviously you will know much more about statistics and the needs of the type of data that you think are relevant for your work and that you're missing to perform your work, which is clearly work that is done in the public interest. So this belongs in what we are proposing a definition of public interest. And as I said at the beginning, this is also a question of sort of regulatory technique. Can you make a public interest definition that specifically addresses the needs of statisticians and the health sector and multiple other sort of sectoral arrangements in one act? Or is this also something where a sector is able to articulate very well what they need and how public interest rationale looks in their sector, that we also need to look at, and I dare to say this because Francesca will accuse me of saying more regulation, but we might need more sectoral regulation for specific cases where we can very well describe that, and what there is currently where it's very, and that's what I understand your intervention to say, where there's currently like really a clearly identifiable blockage or problem in the process.
Hello, Mia Petra. I'm supposed to only listen and learn and in the end comment, but I was happy to regulate the business statistics last mandate. And I just was surprised how long negotiations it was done before the final having the legislation on the table, and they said don't touch it because it's almost 10 years of negotiations how to improve the business statistics. And then what was still missing was that how much there was concentrating on the real-time data. So for me, I don't know, some statistics are very good, but as Francesca was a lot referring to the public side to or be able to do the decisions, even economical ones, then we should wait for the official statistics. It's rather to Google and guess to really need to react. So I understand that's actually very much to the point that the data should be as rapid as we are in this world today, when we are planning, when we are delivering. And if the public side is bound to the official statistics that lag behind several years, then we will have soon the statistics of the pandemic. and then we should do the decisions. So there needs to be some bridging from the statistics. And I happen to know very well the country I know best, because we were colleagues to advise Prime Minister Lipponen at the same time when a colleague who is leading there now the thing. But also then they were already fighting that how much they can make estimates, AI-derived plans for the statistics. So that would really need maybe updating the statistics laws that we do have, or link it then. I find it very interesting. But I also didn't say anything of the real-time data that is every time, everywhere should have a one looking through the legislation, how much does it, and that's why I'm also a lot for the having the distributed, not centralized way, because the centralized way always also lags behind. It's more difficult to make it real time. Very, very interesting points.
Thank you very much, Mia Petra. So I think the institutional form to make sure public authorities have access to relevant real-time data, that's still something that's very much an open discussion. I also understood we have some questions in the chat. Levi, you want to read them out loud?
Yes, I hope I do justice to Dominic's voice. So Dominic Pietron asks, I think this is to Francesca mostly. So would you agree that this kind of data sovereignty clauses, I'm a bit rephrasing here, but data sovereignty clauses that you had in Barcelona, should this be some element that we should bring into the Data Act per se, for instance, to some kind of mechanism? So
bring it in the Data Act. Well, I think you can just do that. You can do that. You can implement those clauses in public procurement contracts. Then now, if we want to make this mandatory in the EU, this is a good conversation. And I think this does not only apply to data, to be honest. I think, for example, the use of open standards and open source software, the use of a specific type of standards for our public service infrastructures, it is a big question. I think now to complement this digital constitution, apparently the EC will lay out the foundation for a digital ID, attribute-based cryptography, digital ID system for all Europeans. I'm looking forward to that. I mean, I think we're lagging behind. I think it's very important to have that. And you will need then to have a data framework to control this data, because this is very important. And this will be probably coupled also with digital payment system, maybe a digital euro even, that should be privacy protecting and that should be able to enable the citizens to access services, control their data, pay for services in a EU ecosystem. So it's basically, these are building blocks that I call digital public infrastructures that need to be built with specific standards and need to be the same for all Europe. So maybe, yes, the EU would start mandate this in the procurement contracts as well, because then if we procure those services, like now, imagine how are public institutions going to spend all the billions coming from Next Generation EU? Yes? Are we applying those clauses, or we're just procuring technologies without, standardizing, without implementing those rules in the technological systems that we use? This would be my question.
Well, spoiler alert, Francesca Bria.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert. Yeah, we're just going to spend that money without looking at public procurement rules or long-term political goals. That's another discussion.
Well, that's a mess, because this is our opportunity.
All right, we are getting also to the close of the event. I would still like to give the floor to Martina Barbero. If you could come here, that's nice, and you're also on camera, if that's okay. And then Francesca and Paul, I'll give you one closing remark, anything you want to share. And then I give the floor to Mia Petra, and afterwards we close. Martina, please.
Thank you. I think some of the difference of opinions that we are seeing are linked to the fact that it's not clear what the objective of the Commission is with this act. So when you look at how they phrase it, it's really about exceptional needs, but this is not what came out of the public consultation, which was much more broader. And the fact that they leave out so much in terms of what's going on at the statistical office level, at the city level, doesn't help to figure out what's the ultimate aim with this approach. So I think the question is this regulation did this suffer from the COVID experience, where basically the main point was accessing mobile network operators' data to map the mobility of the pandemics? Is this like what they have in mind? Because there is so much that is left out, and so many people that are not understanding how the public consultation was taken into account as well, because the statistical office were very vocal, and also cities were also responding to the public consultation. So I think the question for the Commission is this really a small piece of the puzzle, and then there's sectorial legislation coming? Is it just really a small piece? And if this is an internal market, this is a single market, legal basis for the act is single market, so harmonization. Is this really bringing more harmonization if then cities will do their own procurement stuff and the statistical office will update statistical law at the national level? Will we have more harmonization at the end? So I think this is part of the debate, like what's the Commission trying to achieve? And if it's just really modest in terms of ambition, is it because something else is coming afterwards?
Thanks a lot, Martina. Slight update of the plans. We collect one final second question, again from Jan. Jan, keep it please very brief. You have the floor for max 1 minute.
Thanks a lot. So maybe referring to the centralized question, I should note that I'm actually a cooperative entrepreneur, so no centralization attempts from me. I fully agree with Francesca that regulation is not enough. That's why we focus so much on the institution. The question is, what is our theory of change? So how do we achieve this? We can go through experimentation, and I know the works you do. I know stuff that, for example, Finland has been doing with FinData, so going as from the authority of the state. We also plan to spend money in Poland from the Recovery and Resilience Facility to build 2 public data commons in healthcare and in agriculture. But also I would say that Paul has this really important remark here, that the Data Act can be the historic leap. So let's not lose our opportunity to write in strong provisions in it. That's why we have to focus on getting this act right.
All right, thank you, Jan. That was short and succinct. I would like to give the floor first to Francesca to react to the 2 questions and perhaps one final statement. Please keep it short. Then I'll give the floor to Paul. Francesca, please.
Questions?
So the first question came from Martina Barbero, and this is essentially, perhaps it's not, perhaps Paul can better answer that, but it's about essentially Commission intention. So is the Data Act...
I leave that to Paul, but I agreed with the statement of Martina very much, because I think it's a very important statement. And also, you know, my intention is not to go to a fragmented, I mean, actually, yes, I don't want this, what I'm saying about decentralization and the need to do it through experiments and to understand what works, what doesn't before we do regulation. This doesn't mean at all that I want to see a fragmented way where everybody does what they want and we can never scale. I think we need to scale. It has to be done for Europe, and it has to be done actually with European technology, but that's another part of the problem. And the problem is how to get there. So I agree with the statement of Martina for sure. And the other point about Jan, that we can use this act, I agree, but that is maybe what we need to hear from the MEPs, you know, what we can do. And I think for me, that there looked really important what we are saying. Do not restrict, at least, you know, so even if we do not have strong provision in a sense or another, definitely we should have space. So let's leave the space open, in particular when it comes to what you can do for the public interest. Restricting that, it's a mistake. That is for sure what I feel to say. And so I think, you know, my last comment would be to continue this kind of work. And we are here to provide with our examples, with what we do on the ground, with our thinking, in order to inform now this regulatory part at the EU level. So maybe Maria Petra, I mean, we are here basically to continue this work that needs to happen. So that is maybe, you know, it's a work in progress, but as we're saying now, there is a defining moment. We should at least not do it wrong.
I think we can all agree on that. But I'll give the floor now to Paul for his closing remarks and perhaps short answers to the questions.
Yeah, let me try to give a short answer. It's obviously difficult to tell what they have in mind. The narrative that you get from them is this is fallback or this is a question of regulatory technique, but it feels a bit wrong, because if you fall back, you need to define like the things that you have in mind first, and then sort of something for which is in the middle of those which isn't addressed by them. First, like putting a very low floor in and then hoping that this will be filled in is like a recipe for all kinds of stakeholders not interested in making these flows happen to basically stonewall, and that will not go forward. And in the worst case scenario, as Francesca just pointed out, it is also like possibly precludes some kind of like really much needed things. So we need to push there, right? And I want to, like, my final statement, I just want to come back to something else that Francesca said. This thing will all not work if we're not also making the switch to investing into like the capacity of the public sector, the capacity of society to build infrastructures that we or that society controls, that are based on ideas of interoperability and decentralization. Like we can, like we're now, like the cards that have been dealt us is talk about this regulation here, but it feels very strongly that after this this level of peak regulation that we're currently facing in the digital space, like really what probably the next commission, not this commission, needs to do is really think about how to allocate resources and strengthen the public sector, not only by limiting things and by putting regulation, but by building capacity. That's like the really big challenge that I feel is behind this.
All right, thank you, Paul. And I can fully second that. Before we close, I want to give the floor to Mia Petra. Mia Petra, thanks for having been here, and perhaps you can share what you take home from this discussion.
A lot, I take home a lot, and I really hope to cooperate for the writing it into the articles. But then really I take the 3 points. One, the Commission objective, it was more ambitious. In the data strategy they started, in the Parliament version that I know almost by heart still, we wanted more. We were pushing in our one, the business to government part. And it was then, after a few negotiations round, a majority of the Parliament also to stay there. So we should not forget that one. The principle is supported by the Parliament. Of course, there has been a lot of lobby. Already writing that down, I started to meet Business Europe saying that we don't need the Data Act at all. So please do remember, Commission still pushed that forward. They were already caused that we don't need it. Then the first try of the Commission that leaked out, and it was cleaned from this part because of the legal service. So that's another hurdle to take, how to make it so that we could make it so that the legal services will say that no, actually there should not be a public interest for the data. For the comments here on the table, you were thinking that if we are too early, we don't know what to legislate, or are we late? I link it to what Francesca said. We are leaking the data out every single day. And do we have the structures in the public procurement, in the services that we buy all the time, all the public services on the municipality level to the European Commission level? We buy services for the digital services that uses the data of the public side. Do we have even access guaranteed after they are providing the services? Like making the data quality for the service, the raw data, we are leaking out. So we are not at all too early. We understand many parts, but then how to then regulate the details, we still need to learn and think more. But I think the principles are very clear. Public data we are using on the private platforms, private companies deliver the services which are public, and then the data part has been just overlooked, and we should not do that anymore. So even elaborating something that we concretely take a new chapter there, not to look the 5 only, might be very, very good idea. I'm not afraid of losing, but I'm normally not losing too when I start. But then having the developing it, and I must have a honest sense that Commission is still interested. They were at the time of the data strategy to help and work, and I have a sense that even here, because also they couldn't get through what they first wanted. And then the third one is, yes, we should not, of course, not to make the mistake that we tried a lot, or Commission tried a lot, it was not possible, then they give something smaller, and in the end, Business Europe wins. You cannot even do what you are doing today. So that's, I think, is a very, very important. So not Data Act that would limit what's happening today. I must say that I have started slowly to meet with the companies, and then the question I asked after listening half an hour, with your changes to this Data Act, what would change? And they could not answer. So all the small amendments the businesses wanted to do is not to change the situation at all, because nowadays you can do the contract, private contract, you can do the contract that you actually keep your rights to access to data, you can do the contract to share the information to the third parties. So if we take all the amendments they want us to take, we don't change anything. So idea is to change, is to deliberate data and open the access. It will hurt somebody who have been always kept the data for itself, not even use that, but maybe they use sometimes. Germany, a big car factories, big car brands, they are not easy to come here, because we might see that the social the need via private innovations to link the data from the motor with the tires, and everything is private. So that's for the next breakfast session in a couple of weeks.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for those closing remarks, Mia Petra. You said you're not afraid of losing, but of course it's even nicer to win, but that requires preparation. So this is just the first policy breakfast in a series. On the 30th of June, we'll have our second one where we focus on B2B, business to business data sharing, and especially looking at the sustainability goals for the sharing of data. So please join us for that. We have with us then Professor Philip Staap, Dominique Pietron, and Luc Hendricks from SME United as well. So this will be a very good discussion as well. Thanks to all the participants, but of course, thanks to our speakers. Thanks, Francesca, for sharing your practical experience, also some red lines for the upcoming Data Act discussions, which will be very important. And I look forward to reconnect on other topics because there's much to discuss. Paul, thanks for sharing your recent insights from the report and for fighting for like a new institutional infrastructure to make the Data Act also a success for public authorities, which I think is really important. And of course, Mia Petra, thanks a lot for joining us. Thanks for cooperating on this data policy breakfast series and looking forward to the next one. Final thanks to Levi for hosting this together with me, doing all the prep work. Also to my colleagues, Eulian and Sophie. Thanks a lot and see you on the 30th of June. Bye.
Thank you.